Lady Zarathik stood on the crystal balcony of her father's palace, watching the purple suns set over the silver city below. Her people, the Velthari, had built their homes from living crystal that sang soft melodies when the wind touched its surface. The music floated up to her balcony, but she barely heard it anymore. After 300 years of life, even the most beautiful things had become ordinary. She was tall and graceful, with pale blue skin that seemed to glow from within. Her eyes were large and golden, capable of seeing thoughts as clearly as faces. Long silver hair fell to her waist, moving like liquid mercury when she walked. The Velthari people called her the crown jewel of their world, and beings from across the galaxy had traveled millions of miles just to catch a glimpse of her beauty. But beauty was not what made Zara famous throughout known space. It was her mind. At 50 years old, she had solved mathematical problems that had puzzled scholars for centuries. By 100, she had designed new types of starships that could travel between dimensions. By 200, she had written books on philosophy that were studied in schools across 30 different worlds. Now, at 300, she was bored. "My lady," came a soft voice behind her. Zara turned to see her personal assistant, a young Velthari named Cathara, approaching with careful steps. "Another suitor has arrived," Zara sighed. "What species this time?" "The Zephyrians, my lady. Their prince claims he can think in 12 dimensions at once." "Only 12? Zara raised one eyebrow. The last crystal being claimed 15 dimensions. Before that, the energy creature from the Spiral Nebula insisted he existed in all dimensions. Simultaneously, Cathara shifted nervously. "Shall I prepare the trial chambers?" "Of course." Zara turned back to the sunset. "The same 5 trials as always. Though I suspect this one will fail at the first test, just like all the others." For 3 centuries, suitors had come to win her hand. Some came for political reasons, hoping to gain alliance with the powerful Velthari through marriage. Others came for the challenge, believing that conquering the unconquerable Lady Zarathik would prove their worth. A few came because they had fallen in love with stories of her beauty and intelligence. All of them failed. The trials had been designed by the greatest minds of the Velthari civilization. They tested not just intelligence, but wisdom, creativity, empathy, and spiritual depth. The first trial, the Chamber of Infinite Calculations, required solving mathematical equations that existed in 17 dimensions. Most beings could barely comprehend 3 dimensions, let alone 17. The second trial was the Maze of Memories, where participants faced their deepest fears and greatest regrets. Many went insane. Others emerged as broken shells of their former selves. A few had been trapped in the maze for decades, unable to face their own failures. The third trial tested empathy by requiring the participant to solve a complex dispute between 3 alien species who hated each other. The fourth trial demanded the creation of something that would benefit all life in the galaxy. The fifth and final trial was the most difficult of all. Zara herself would enter the participant's mind and examine their deepest thoughts and motivations. In 300 years, no one had passed even 3 of the 5 trials. Zara had stopped hoping that anyone would succeed. The trials had become routine, a tedious duty she performed to satisfy the laws of her people. According to Velthari tradition, she could not refuse suitors, and she could not marry until someone proved worthy by completing all 5 trials. She was trapped in a prison of her own intelligence. "My lady," Cathara said again, "there is something else. The human delegation has arrived." Zara frowned. "Humans? I thought they were still too primitive for interstellar travel. They developed faster than expected, my lady. Their ship arrived this morning. It's quite small compared to most vessels, but it made the journey from their home system in record time. Are they here to attempt the trials?" "No, my lady. They claimed to be on a diplomatic mission, something about establishing trade relations and cultural exchange. Zara felt a flicker of interest. It had been decades since she had encountered a new species. What are they like? Strange, my lady. They're much smaller than most intelligent species, and they have no psychic abilities at all. They cannot read thoughts or manipulate energy with their minds. They seem to rely entirely on primitive tools and mechanical devices. How primitive? They still use physical computers, my lady, and their ship is powered by controlled explosions rather than quantum energy manipulation. Zara almost smiled. Controlled explosions? Yes, my lady. Their captain tried to explain it to our port officials. He seemed very excited about the concept of internal combustion and chemical rockets. The officials were quite confused. Now Zara was definitely interested. This captain, what is he like? His name is Jake Miller. He's young for a human, perhaps 35 of their years. He has brown hair and green eyes, and he's shorter than most Velthari. But my lady, he asks the most peculiar questions. What kind of questions? He wanted to know how our crystal buildings sing. He asked about the mathematical principles behind our architecture. He spent an hour examining the docking bay equipment, trying to understand how it works. He even asked if he could visit our libraries. Zara turned away from the sunset. For the first time in months, she felt curious about something. He wants to visit our libraries? Yes, my lady. He says he's an engineer, and he's fascinated by how different species solve technical problems. He seems to think that humans could learn much from Velthari science. And what does he think Velthari could learn from humans? Kethara looked puzzled. He says humans are very good at finding simple solutions to complex problems. He mentioned something about thinking outside the box, though I'm not sure what boxes have to do with problem solving. Zara walked to her desk and activated the viewing screen. Show me this human captain. The screen displayed the image of a man standing in the palace courtyard, looking up at the crystal spires with obvious wonder. He was indeed shorter than most Velthari, with a sturdy build and calloused hands that spoke of manual labor. His face was open and friendly, with laugh lines around his eyes. He wore a simple blue uniform with no decorations or symbols of rank, except for a small insignia on his collar. What struck Zara most was his expression. While most visitors to the palace tried to look important or impressive, this human looked genuinely delighted to be there. He was pointing at different architectural features and talking animatedly to his companions, like a child discovering a new toy. He doesn't look like he's here to attempt the trials, Zara observed. No, my lady. In fact, when the protocol officers explained the trials to him, he laughed. Laughed? Yes, my lady. He said the trials sounded fascinating from an anthropological perspective, but he was already married to his work. He asked if he could observe the trials instead, to better understand Velthari culture. Zara stared at the screen. In 300 years, no male of any species had ever asked to observe the trials rather than attempt them. The idea was so foreign that she couldn't quite process it. Where is he now? In the guest quarters, my lady. He's reading about Velthari history and asking our scholars questions about ancient engineering techniques. Zara made a decision that surprised even her. Invite him to dinner tomorrow night. I want to meet this human who thinks he can understand us by studying our buildings. Yes, my lady. Shall I also prepare for the Zephyrian prince's trials? Oh, yes, Zara said absently, still staring at the image of the human captain. Schedule them for the day after tomorrow. I suspect they won't take long. As Kethara left to make the arrangements, Zara remained at her desk, studying the human's face. Something about his expression reminded her of herself when she was younger, before centuries of disappointed suitors had worn away her enthusiasm for new experiences. She wondered what it would be like to meet someone who looked at the world with such obvious curiosity and joy. She was about to find out. The next evening, Zara waited in her private dining hall as servants prepared for her guests' arrival. She had chosen this room because it was smaller and less formal than the great banquet hall, where she usually entertained visiting dignitaries. The walls were made of singing crystal. It glowed softly in shades of blue and silver, and large windows looked out over the palace gardens. She had dressed simply in a flowing gown of pale green silk, with only a small crown of twisted silver on her head. Most suitors expected her to appear in full royal regalia, but something told her this human would be more comfortable with less ceremony. When Jake Miller entered the room, he stopped and stared at the crystal walls with the same wonder she had seen on the viewing screen. His uniform was clean and pressed, but she noticed he still wore his practical work boots instead of formal shoes. "Good evening, Captain Miller," she said, rising from her chair. "Welcome to my home." Jake turned toward her and his eyes went wide. For a moment, he simply stood there, and Zara wondered if he was going to react like every other visitor, either falling to his knees in worship or becoming so nervous he could barely speak. Instead, Jake smiled broadly and walked forward with his hand extended. "Lady Zarathik, it's an honor to meet you. Thank you for inviting me to dinner. I have to tell you, your palace is absolutely incredible from an engineering perspective." Zara looked at his outstretched hand, puzzled. Most beings bowed deeply when meeting her, and many were too intimidated to speak at all. "This is a human greeting," Jake explained, noticing her confusion. "We shake hands when we meet someone new. It's a way of showing friendship and respect." Cautiously, Zara reached out and took his hand. His skin was warm and slightly rough from years of work. He shook her hand firmly but gently, then released it. "Please, sit down," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "I'm curious about your people. We know very little about humans." Jake sat down and immediately looked around the room. Again, "I'm sorry, I don't mean to stare, but how do you make the walls sing like that?" "The frequency seems to change based on the temperature and air pressure in the room." Zara blinked. In 300 years of entertaining guests, no one had ever asked about the technical aspects of her home before they had even started eating. "The crystal contains microscopic resonance chambers that vibrate when air moves through them. The pitch changes based on environmental conditions." "That's brilliant," Jake said, leaning forward with excitement. "So it's like a massive musical instrument that plays itself based on the weather. Do different rooms have different bass frequencies?" "Yes, each room is tuned to create harmony with the others. The entire palace is essentially one enormous musical composition." Jake shook his head in amazement. The engineering required to calculate all those harmonic relationships must have been incredibly complex. How long did it take to build? 47 years, Zara said, finding herself enjoying his enthusiasm. "My great-grandfather designed it as a wedding gift for my great-grandmother." 47 years of continuous construction, or did they have to wait for certain materials or environmental conditions? Zara found herself explaining the intricate process of growing living crystal, something she had never discussed with anyone outside her family. Jake listened intently, asking technical questions that showed he understood not just what she was saying, but why each step was necessary. Servants brought their dinner, delicate dishes that were works of art as much as food. Jake examined each plate with the same careful attention he had given the architecture. "This is beautiful," he said, looking at her arrangement of vegetables that had been shaped to look like tiny flowers. "But I have to ask, is it also functional? I mean, does the artistic presentation serve a purpose beyond aesthetics?" "The shapes help different flavors complement each other," Zara explained. "Each bite contains a precise balance of tastes and textures." Jake took a small bite and his Face lit up. That's amazing. It's like edible chemistry. The way the flavors interact and change as you chew. Someone had to understand the molecular structure of each ingredient to create this effect. Again, Zara found herself explaining something she had never discussed with a guest before. She told him about Velthari food science, about how her people had learned to modify the molecular structure of ingredients to create specific taste experiences. We have something similar, Jake said, though much more primitive. We call it cooking. We use heat and chemical reactions to change the properties of our food. It's nowhere near as sophisticated as this, but the basic principle is the same. You modify food at the molecular level? Well, yes, though we didn't think of it that way until recently. When you bake bread, you're using heat to cause chemical reactions that change the structure of proteins and carbohydrates. When you grill meat, you're breaking down complex molecules and creating new flavor compounds. Zara stared at him. Your people discovered molecular gastronomy without understanding the science behind it? I guess so. We just knew that certain combinations of ingredients and techniques created better flavors. We figured out the science later. This was fascinating. The Velthari had developed their food preparation techniques through careful scientific study. The idea that another species had achieved similar results through trial and error was almost unthinkable. Tell me more about your work, she said. You mentioned that you're an engineer. Jake's face became even more animated. I design and maintain systems for long-distance space travel, life support, navigation, propulsion, anything that keeps people alive and moving between stars. It's problem-solving on a massive scale. What kind of problems? Well, take air recycling. You have a limited amount of breathable atmosphere on a ship, but people are constantly using oxygen and producing carbon dioxide. You need systems that can clean the air, maintain proper pressure, and handle emergencies like hull breaches or equipment failures. How do you solve such problems without psychic abilities or advanced energy manipulation? Jake grinned. We use what we call brute force engineering. If we can't manipulate matter with our minds, we build machines to do it for us. If we can't read each other's thoughts, we create communication systems. If we can't predict the future, we plan for every possible failure we can imagine, and then build backup systems for those. That sounds incredibly inefficient. It is, compared to what you can do, but it has some advantages. Because we have to build everything from scratch, we understand exactly how each component works. When something breaks, we can fix it. When conditions change, we can adapt our machines to handle new situations. Zara leaned back in her chair, studying this strange human. You sound like you enjoy the challenges. I love them, Jake said simply. Every problem is a puzzle. Every solution opens up new possibilities. Even our failures teach us something useful. What do you mean? Well, we have a saying, failure is just success that hasn't happened yet. When something doesn't work, we don't give up. We figure out why it didn't work, and we use that knowledge to build something better. This concept was alien to Zara. Velthari culture prized perfection and success. Failure was seen as a sign of inadequate planning or insufficient ability. Your people don't mind failing? Jake laughed. We expect to fail, at least at first. Some of our greatest achievements came from accidents or mistakes. We discovered one of our most important medicines because a scientist left some samples out by mistake and they got contaminated with mold. The contamination killed harmful bacteria, so we learned to use mold to make medicine. You turned a mistake into a medical breakthrough? Happens all the time. We built our first space rockets by studying ones that exploded. We learned to fly by watching birds and then crashing a lot of gliders until we figured out what worked. Zara was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. The idea that a species could advance through systematic failure was completely contrary to everything she had been taught. "Captain Miller," she said finally, "tomorrow the Zephyrian prince will attempt our trials. Would you like to observe them?" "As an anthropological study, of course." Jake's eyes lit up. "Really? That would be incredible. I'd love to understand how your people evaluate potential mates. The social dynamics must be fascinating." Most observers focus on whether the participant will succeed or fail. "What would you look for?" Jake thought for a moment. "I'd want to understand what the trials are really testing. Not just the obvious things like intelligence or strength, but the underlying qualities that your people value." "What does it mean to be worthy in Velthari culture?" Zara smiled. For the first time in decades, she was looking forward to watching the trials. Not because she expected the participant to succeed, but because she was curious to see what this human engineer would notice that everyone else had missed. "The trials begin at sunrise," she said. "I'll have someone escort you to the observation chamber." "Thank you," Jake said. "This is exactly the kind of cultural insight I was hoping to gain from this visit." As Jake left that evening, Zara remained in her dining hall, thinking about their conversation. He had asked her more interesting questions in one evening than most suitors asked during their entire courtship attempts. More importantly, he had treated her like a person rather than a prize to be won. The next morning, Jake arrived at the observation chamber just as the first purple sun began to rise over the crystal city. Zara was already there, seated on a throne-like chair that gave her a clear view of the trial chambers below. She wore formal robes of deep blue silk, and her silver crown caught the morning light. "Good morning, Captain Miller," she said as he entered. "Are you ready to witness 300 years of tradition?" Jake took the seat beside her, a simple chair that had been added for his benefit. "I'm fascinated already. I've been reading about Velthari history all night. Your marriage trials are mentioned in texts going back over 2,000 years. You spent the night reading?" "I couldn't sleep. The concept of testing compatibility through formal challenges is brilliant from a social engineering perspective. Most species I've encountered rely on random attraction or family arrangements." Below them, servants were preparing the first trial chamber. The room was perfectly white and empty, except for a single pedestal in the center. Above the pedestal, geometric shapes made of pure light began to form in the air, spinning and shifting in patterns that hurt Jake's eyes to look at directly. "The chamber of infinite calculations," Zara explained. "Those shapes represent mathematical equations that exist in 17 dimensions. The participant must solve them all within 1 hour. How many equations are there? It varies. The number depends on how quickly the participant solves each one. As soon as one equation is completed, a new one appears. The goal is to solve them faster than they can be generated." Jake pulled out a small notebook and began sketching the light patterns. "So it's not just about mathematical ability. It's about processing speed and endurance." "Exactly. Most participants exhaust themselves trying to solve the first few equations. Through pure computational power." The doors to the chamber opened, and Prince Vexthari of the Zephyrians entered. He was tall and thin, with blue-green skin that shimmered like fish scales. 4 arms extended from his torso, and his head was elongated, presumably to house his enhanced brain. He moved with fluid grace toward the pedestal. "He's beautiful," Jake observed. "His body seems designed for multitasking." "Can he think with all 4 arms independently?" "Yes, and he can process 12 parallel thought streams simultaneously. By traditional standards, he should excel at this trial." Prince Vexthari reached the pedestal and immediately began working. His 4 arms moved in complex patterns, tracing calculations in the air. Holographic numbers and symbols appeared around him as he worked through the equations at impressive speed. Jake watched for several minutes, taking notes. "He's treating each equation as a separate problem," he murmured, "attacking them with brute force calculation. Is that wrong?" "Not wrong, exactly. But look at the patterns." Jake showed Zara his notebook, where he had been sketching the light shapes. "The equations aren't random. There's an underlying structure connecting them all." Zara looked at his rough drawings. "What do you mean?" "See these recurring elements? And the way certain shapes appear in multiple equations? I think the test isn't really about solving individual problems. It's about recognizing the meta-pattern that connects them all." Down in the chamber, Prince Vexthari was beginning to show signs of strain. His movements were becoming less fluid, and sweat was forming on his scaled skin. He was solving equations quickly, but new ones were appearing even faster. "He's going to fail," Jake said quietly. "He's stuck in a computational loop. The harder he works, the more problems the system generates." "How can you tell?" "Watch his arms. He's repeating the same calculation methods over and over, just applying them to different numbers. He's not adapting his approach." 20 minutes later, Prince Vexthari collapsed from exhaustion. The geometric shapes above the pedestal flickered and disappeared, leaving only empty white light. "Another failure," Zara said with disappointment. "He lasted longer than most, but the result is the same. Can I ask you something?" Jake said, closing his notebook. "What would happen if someone identified the meta-pattern instead of trying to solve every individual equation?" "I don't understand." "Well, if I'm right about the underlying structure, someone could potentially solve the entire test by figuring out the organizing principle. Instead of answering thousands of individual questions, they could answer the one big question that contains all the others." Zara stared at him. "No one has ever approached the trial that way. Has anyone ever tried? Most participants are so focused on demonstrating their computational abilities that they ... She paused, understanding dawning on her face. "They miss the forest for the trees, as you humans say." "Exactly. Your trial is testing for something much more sophisticated than calculation speed. It's testing for the ability to see patterns within patterns, to think at multiple levels simultaneously." They moved to the second trial chamber, which looked like a maze made of mirrors that reflected not images, but memories. The walls showed scenes from the participants' past, shifting and changing as they walked through the corridors. "The maze of memories," Zara explained. "Participants must confront their deepest fears and greatest failures. Most become lost in their own regrets." A new candidate, a crystalline being from the Andromeda sector, entered the maze. Almost immediately, the mirrors began showing scenes of destruction and loss. The being stopped, transfixed by the images of a war that had destroyed its home planet. "He's reliving trauma," Jake observed. "That's going to paralyze him emotionally." The crystalline being began to move deeper into the maze, but its steps were uncertain. As it encountered more painful memories, it began to shake and emit high-pitched sounds of distress. "Most participants try to fight their memories or hide from them," Zara said. "Neither approach works." "What would work?" "Acceptance, integration, the ability to acknowledge past mistakes without being consumed by them." Jake was quiet for a moment, watching the being struggle with its reflections. "On human ships, we have something called failure analysis. When something goes wrong, we don't try to pretend it didn't happen or blame ourselves endlessly. We study the failure to understand why it occurred and what we can learn from it. You treat your mistakes as learning opportunities? We have to. In space, the same mistake twice can kill everyone on the ship. So we develop a culture where admitting errors and learning from them is more important than preserving ego." The crystalline being in the maze had stopped moving entirely, overwhelmed by its memories. Guards entered to escort it out, before it suffered permanent psychological damage. Another failure, Zara sighed. In 300 years, only 12 participants had successfully navigated the maze. What did those 12 do differently? They talked to their memories instead of running from them. They treated their past selves with compassion rather than judgment. Jake nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense. You can't change the past, but you can change your relationship with it. The third trial was held in a large circular chamber with 3 separate sections. Representatives of 3 different alien species sat in each section, glaring at each other with obvious hostility. The test of empathy, Zara explained. These 3 species have been in conflict for over a century. The participant must find a way to mediate their dispute. What are they fighting about? Mineral rights to an asteroid field. Each species claims historical ownership, and none will compromise. A new candidate, a telepathic entity that appeared as shifting energy patterns, entered the chamber. It immediately began projecting thoughts into the minds of all 3 groups, trying to impose a solution through psychic influence. The response was immediate and negative. All 3 species began shouting protests and accusations. The energy, being tried harder, broadcasting more powerful mental commands, which only made the situation worse. Telepathic coercion, Jake observed. That's never going to work. Why not? The entity is far more powerful than any of the 3 species, because you can't force people to agree. You can make them comply temporarily, but that just builds resentment. Real solutions have to come from understanding, not dominance. The energy being's attempts at mental control were causing chaos in the chamber. The 3 species were now shouting at each other and at the candidate. Guards moved in to separate the groups before violence could break out. How would you approach this problem? Zara asked. Jake thought for a moment. I'd start by listening, not to their positions, but to their underlying needs. People usually fight about surface issues while the real problems lie deeper. What do you mean? Well, they all claim to want the asteroid field. But why? What do they really need? Security? Resources? Recognition? Respect? If you can address the underlying needs, sometimes you can find solutions that give everyone what they actually want, even if nobody gets exactly what they originally demanded. You think there's a solution that could satisfy all 3 species? Maybe, but it would require them to trust each other enough to reveal their real concerns instead of just stating their demands. And how would you build that trust? Jake smiled. Same way we do it on human ships. Start small. Find something minor that all 3 groups can agree on, something that benefits everyone. Build success on top of success until they're comfortable. With bigger agreements. Zara looked at him with growing interest. You've thought about this before. 2 days later, Jake stood at the entrance to the Chamber of Infinite Calculations. He had spent the intervening time reading every text he could find about the trials, talking to Valfari scholars, and reviewing his notes from observing the failed attempts. Zara watched from the observation chamber above, her golden eyes focused intently on the human below. Word had spread throughout the palace that the strange human visitor was going to attempt the trials, and the chamber was filled with curious Valfari, nobles who had come to witness what they expected to be another quick failure. Are you ready, Captain Miller? Zara's voice came through the chamber's communication system. Jake looked up and nodded. As ready as I'll ever be. Though I have to admit, this is the first time I've tried to solve math problems that exist in more dimensions than I can imagine. The geometric shapes began to form above the pedestal, spinning and shifting in patterns that seemed to bend reality itself. Jake walked to the center of the chamber and pulled out his notebook and a simple pencil. What is he doing? Whispered one of the Velthari observers. Is he going to calculate with primitive tools? Jake ignored the murmurs and began sketching the light patterns in his notebook. Instead of trying to solve the equations immediately, he spent several minutes just watching and drawing. He noted which shapes appeared most frequently, which patterns repeated, and how the equations seemed to connect to each other. "He's not even attempting to solve them," another observer said. "He's just making pictures." But Zara leaned forward, watching with growing interest. She could see that Jake was looking for something specific, approaching the problem like an engineer examining a complex machine dot after 10 minutes of observation. Jake suddenly smiled. He had found what he was looking for. Instead of trying to solve individual equations, he began writing in his notebook, working out what appeared to be a single elegant formula. "There," he said aloud, holding up his notebook. "The master equation." The geometric shapes above the pedestal flickered, then suddenly rearranged themselves into a simple, beautiful pattern. The complex 17-dimensional mathematics collapsed into a single expression that even the Velthari observers could understand. The chamber fell silent. "Impossible," breathed one of the nobles. "He solved the entire test with one equation." Zara stared down at Jake, who was grinning like a child who had just figured out how a magic trick worked. "How did you do that?" "Engineering school," Jake called up to her. "We had a professor who used to say, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. All those complex equations were just variations on a single theme. Once I found the underlying pattern, everything else fell into place." The chamber prepared for the second trial. Jake walked into the maze of memories, and immediately the mirrors began showing scenes from his past. Unlike the previous candidates, Jake didn't stop or show signs of distress. Instead, he began talking to the reflections as if they were old friends. "Oh, there's the time I crashed the shuttle on Europa," he said, approaching one mirror that showed him as a young man standing beside a smoking wreck. "I was so embarrassed. Captain Rodriguez was furious." The memory Jake in the mirror looked ashamed and defeated, but the real Jake just shrugged. "You know what I learned from that crash? Always check your fuel calculations twice. That lesson probably saved my life a dozen times afterward." He moved to another mirror, showing him at his father's funeral. The memory Jake was crying, overwhelmed by grief and regret. "I'm sorry I wasn't there more, Dad," Jake said to the reflection. "I was so focused on my career that I missed too many important moments. But I want you to know that everything you taught me about fixing things and never giving up, I use those lessons every day. You'd be proud of what I've built with the foundation you gave me." The observers in the chamber above watched in amazement as Jake moved through the maze, acknowledging his failures and losses, but refusing to be defined by them. He treated each painful memory as a teacher rather than a tormentor. "He's not fighting his past," Zara observed quietly. "He's integrating it. This is unprecedented," whispered Kethara. "Most beings become trapped in their regrets." Jake reached the center of the maze in less than 30 minutes, having transformed his painful memories into wisdom and strength. The mirrors showed one final image. Jake as he was now, standing confidently in the center of the maze, at peace with his past, and ready for his future. The third trial brought Jake face to face with the 3 feuding alien species. The Corvani were insectoid beings who communicated through chemical signals. The Draxi were energy creatures who existed partially in another dimension. The Melodi were plant-based life forms who thought in seasonal cycles spanning decades. The asteroid field contains enough rare minerals to supply all 3 of our civilizations for centuries. The Corvani representative clicked. "Our ancestors discovered it first." "Discovery means nothing," pulsed the Draxi. "We were the first to establish mining operations there." "Both of you are thinking too small," rustled the Melodi. "The field should be preserved for future generations, not stripped bare for immediate profit." Previous candidates had tried to impose solutions through force, telepathy, or superior logic. Jake took a different approach. He sat down in the center of the chamber and began asking questions. "Can you tell me about your home worlds?" he asked the Corvani. "What are they like?" "Hot and dry," clicked the representative. "Our young are dying because we cannot maintain proper temperature regulation without the minerals from the asteroid field." Jake turned to the Draxi. "And your people?" "We exist between dimensions, the energy being pulsed. But the barriers between realities are weakening. We need the minerals to build stabilizers, or our entire species will be scattered across the cosmos." "And the melody?" "Our children take root in mineral-rich soil, the plant being rustled. Without these resources, the next generation will be stunted, unable to reach their full potential." Jake was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "So you all need the minerals to protect your children?" "Yes," all three representatives said simultaneously. "What if I told you that the asteroid field contains enough material to meet all your needs if you're willing to work together?" "Impossible," clicked the Corvani. "The deposits are finite." "Are they?" Jake pulled out a small device from his pocket, a basic mineral scanner that human ships use to analyze asteroid composition. "This is primitive compared to your technology, but it might show you something you've missed." He activated the scanner and projected its readings into the air. The three species stared at the data in surprise. "The asteroid field isn't just sitting there," Jake explained. "It's part of a larger system. The gravitational interactions between the asteroids are constantly creating new mineral formations. If you mine it carefully, working together to maintain the proper orbital dynamics, the field will actually produce more resources over time than any one species could extract by themselves." "You're suggesting a cooperative mining operation," pulsed the Draxi. "I'm suggesting a partnership. The Corvani have the best chemical analysis technology. The Draxi can work in the dangerous areas between dimensions. The Melody think in long-term cycles that could help manage the resource flow sustainably." Jake stood up and walked to the center of the chamber. "Your children are all at risk, but together you have the knowledge and abilities to save them all. Apart, you're just fighting over scraps." The three representatives looked at each other with new understanding. For the first time in a century, they began to discuss cooperation instead of competition. "He did it," whispered one of the Velthari observers. "He actually got them to agree." But Jake wasn't finished. "I have one more suggestion," he said. "Start with something small. Maybe a joint research station to study the asteroid field's gravitational dynamics. Build trust with a project that benefits everyone, and expand from there." 2 hours later, the three species had drafted a preliminary agreement for cooperative mining operations. It wasn't perfect, but it was a foundation they could build on. 3 trials completed, Zara announced, her voice betraying her amazement. "In 300 years, no one has ever made it this far." The 4th trial was the challenge of creation. Jake was given access to the palace workshops and asked to create something that would benefit all sentient life. All previous candidates had attempted to design grand technological marvels or write profound philosophical treatises. Jake spent 3 days working with simple materials and basic tools. When he emerged from the workshop, he carried a small device that looked almost primitive compared to Velthari technology. "It's a universal translator," he explained to the assembled crowd, "but not just for words. It translates emotional context, cultural assumptions, and even basic thought patterns between different species." He demonstrated by having volunteers from different alien species speak through the device. Not only did it translate their words perfectly, but it conveyed the emotional undertones and cultural implications that were usually lost in translation. "The Corvani communicate through chemical signals that carry emotional weight," Jake explained. "The Draxi use energy patterns that include dimensional harmonics." The melodies speak in seasonal metaphors that span decades. The final trial chamber was unlike the others. It was a simple room with 2 chairs facing each other, surrounded by walls of polished black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Jake sat in one chair while Zara took the other, her golden eyes beginning to glow with psychic energy. "This is the test of truth," she explained, her voice echoing strangely in the dark chamber. "I will enter your mind and examine your deepest thoughts, your hidden motivations, your secret desires. No one has ever passed this trial because no one has ever impressed me with what I found in their mind." Jake nodded calmly. "I understand, though I have to warn you, human minds are pretty chaotic places. We don't organize our thoughts the way psychic species do." "I'm prepared for that," Zara said, though she wasn't entirely sure she was. She had read about human mental patterns, but she had never experienced one directly. She reached out with her psychic abilities and gently touched Jake's mind. Immediately, she was overwhelmed by the sheer noise of human consciousness. Thoughts tumbled over each other in a constant stream. Memories, ideas, worries, plans, random observations, and half-formed concepts all mixed together without apparent organization. But as she adjusted to the chaos, she began to see patterns within it. Jake's thoughts weren't organized like a Velthari mind, with neat categories and logical hierarchies. Instead, they were connected by association, emotion, and practical experience. She followed one thought thread and found herself experiencing Jake's memory of the first time he had seen a starship engine. He was 12 years old, visiting a spaceport with his father. The massive fusion reactor was beautiful and terrifying, and young Jake had peppered the tour guide with questions about how it worked. Why do you need magnetic containment? What happens if the field fails? How do you control the reaction rate? Could you make it more efficient? The tour guide had been annoyed by the constant questions, but Jake's father had smiled and said, "He's always been like this. He can't see something work without wanting to understand it." Zara moved deeper into Jake's memories and found years of this pattern. Jake learning to fix bicycles, then cars, then atmospheric shuttles, then starships. Each new challenge built on the previous ones, creating a foundation of practical knowledge that spanned dozens of different technologies. But what struck Zara most was Jake's motivation. He didn't learn about machines because he wanted to become rich or famous or powerful. He learned because he genuinely loved understanding how things worked. Every new piece of knowledge was exciting to him, not because of what it could get him, but because it revealed another piece of the grand puzzle of existence. She found his memories of engineering school, where other students had complained about difficult professors and impossible assignments. Jake had thrived on the challenges, staying up all night, working on problems that fascinated him. When he failed, and he failed often in those early years, he treated each failure as valuable data about what didn't work. Zara explored Jake's memories of his first assignment aboard a human starship. He was young and inexperienced, surrounded by veteran engineers who were skeptical of the new graduate. But Jake had proved himself by solving a critical life support problem that had stumped the entire engineering team. The solution hadn't come from superior knowledge or advanced training. It had come from Jake's willingness to approach the problem from a completely different angle, questioning assumptions that everyone else had taken for granted. As Zara delved deeper into Jake's mind, she found something that amazed her. Jake's thoughts about the trials weren't focused on winning or proving his worth. Instead, his mind was filled with genuine fascination about Velthari culture. She saw his notes about their architecture, their food science, their social structures. She found his theories about how Velthari's psychic abilities had shaped their approach to problem solving. She discovered his excitement about the possibility of combining human and Velthari technologies to create something entirely new, Most surprising of all, she found his thoughts about her. Jake wasn't attracted to her because of her beauty or her royal status. He was fascinated by her mind. She saw his wonder at her intelligence, his respect for her knowledge, and his genuine curiosity about how she saw the world. In one memory, she found Jake talking to himself in his quarters after their dinner together. "She's incredible," he had said aloud. "The way she thinks about molecular gastronomy, the depth of her understanding of harmonic architecture, the casual way she discusses concepts that would take human scientists years to grasp. I wonder what she thinks about when she's alone. What problems keep her mind busy? What challenges does someone that brilliant face?" Zara was startled to realize that Jake had been as curious about her inner life as she was about his. She moved to more recent memories and found Jake's thoughts during the trials. He hadn't been trying to impress anyone or prove his superiority. Instead, he had approached each challenge as a puzzle to be solved, bringing his engineering mindset to problems that others had tried to overwhelm with raw power or advanced abilities. In his memory of the mathematical trial, she saw his thought process clearly. He had recognized that the 17-dimensional equations were a distraction, a complex presentation of a simple underlying principle. His engineering training had taught him to look for the core function beneath elaborate designs. During the memory maze, Jake's approach had been shaped by his experience with failure analysis on starships. He had learned to examine problems without emotional attachment, to extract useful information from mistakes without being paralyzed by regret. The empathy trial had drawn on his experience managing diverse crews on human starships. When beings from different worlds were trapped together in a small space for months, survival depended on finding common ground and building cooperation. But what impressed Zara most was Jake's motivation throughout all the trials. He hadn't been trying to win her hand in marriage. He had been genuinely interested in understanding how the trials worked, what they tested for, and what they revealed about Velthari values. As she prepared to withdraw from his mind, Zara found one final set of thoughts that stopped her completely. These were Jake's most recent reflections from just before the final trial began. "I never intended to court Lady Zarathic," his thoughts ran. "I came here as a diplomat and ended up attempting trials that were never meant for someone like me. But these past few days have been the most intellectually stimulating of my life. She challenges me to think in ways I never have before. She sees patterns and connections that I miss completely, and she explains complex concepts with an elegance that makes them seem obvious." Jake's thoughts continued. If I pass this final trial, what happens then? The laws of her people would make us mates, but that was never my goal. I don't want to trap her in a marriage she didn't choose. But I also can't stop thinking about what we could discover together. Her mind and mine approach problems so differently that we might be able to solve challenges that neither of us could handle alone. Zara found herself experiencing Jake's emotions directly. He was attracted to her, but not in the possessive way of previous suitors. He wanted to know her better, to work alongside her, to explore the universe with someone who could show him new ways of thinking. Most importantly, she sensed that Jake saw her as an individual rather than a prize. He wasn't trying to win her, or conquer her, or impress her. He simply wanted to understand her and hoped that she might find him worth understanding in return. Zara slowly withdrew from Jake's mind, her psychic abilities fading back to normal levels. She sat in her chair for a long moment, processing what she had experienced. "Well?" Jake asked quietly. "Did I pass or fail?" Zara looked at him with new eyes. "Jake Miller," she said formally, "you have completed all 5 trials. According to the laws of my people, you have proven yourself worthy." Jake shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Lady Zarathic, I need to be honest with you. I never intended to seek your hand in marriage. I was just curious about your culture. I know, Zara said softly. I saw that in your mind. So what happens? Now? I don't want to force you into anything you don't want. Zara stood up and walked to the chamber door. For a moment, Jake thought she was going to leave without another word. Instead, she turned back to face him. Jake Miller, she said, would you be interested in a partnership? What kind of partnership? The kind where two people explore the galaxy together, combining their different ways of thinking to solve problems that neither could handle alone. The kind where both partners are free to choose each other every day, instead of being bound by laws or traditions. Jake stood up, a smile spreading across his face. That sounds like the most interesting engineering project I've ever been offered. Then, it's settled, Zara said, returning his smile. Though I should warn you, I've never been anyone's partner before. I might not be very good at it. That's okay, Jake said. I've never been in a partnership with someone from another species. We can figure it out together. As they left the trial chamber, Zara realized that Jake had done something no suitor had ever managed. He had made her excited about her own future. For the first time in 3 centuries, she looked forward to tomorrow because she didn't know what it would bring.